Today we're going to talk about section 5.2, inverse functions. Okay? An inverse function is basically sometimes you know how many items you're purchasing and you know the price. Well, there are other times where you know the prices and you want to figure out how many items you need to purchase. So you're switching what you're inputting and what you're outputting. So basically, in this case, in a function, you're putting in an x and you're getting a y. So this time we're going to want to put in a y and get an x. So to find the inverse function, we're actually going to switch the x and y. So let's see how that works. Here's a function, f of x equals 2x plus 3. Okay? So step one, the first thing that you do is you change f of x to y. So this is y equals 2x plus 3. Step two, then, we want to switch x and y. So we're going to turn our y into an x and our x into a y. Step three, solve for y. So we want to get y by itself. We do the order of operations backwards. We're going to minus 3 to take this away, so we have to minus 3 over here. So we get x minus 3 equals 2y. We're taking 2 times y. To get rid of the 2, we need to divide by 2. Multiply, divide. So we're going to divide by 2 here. So we get x minus 3 divided by 2 equals y. Step 4, to indicate that this is an inverse, you need to change y to f inverse of x. This negative 1, f to the negative 1 power, means that it is the inverse. So we would write this as f inverse of x equals x minus 3 over 2. And this would be my final answer. Okay? So let's try another one. Okay? Similar. So we're going to start with f of x equals 8x plus 4. So you should be looking at your notes and know the first step is to change this to a y. Step 2 is to switch my x and y's. Step 3 is to solve for y. So we find out that x minus 4 over 8 is y. So we know the last step, write it as f inverse of x equals x minus 4 over 8. Okay? I'm going to use this new problem, since it was very similar, to explain domain and range. If I graph this function 8x plus 4, we know that that's going to give me a line. Okay, so you can graph it on your calculator and know that it gives you a line. So I know that my domain is all real numbers and my range is all real numbers of a line, because my x values go on forever and my y values go on forever. You're going to be asked to find the domain and the range of a inverse function. Well, just like we are inverting the x and the y, the domain and range invert. Well, since they're the same in this case, they would be the same. So we're going to show you how that works in the next problem. Okay? So let's try another one where that's going to be affected. So let's look at f of x equals x squared plus 10. First step, turn that into a y. Second step, switch the x and y. Third step, solve for y. Here we have a y squared. To get y by itself, we're going to take the square root of both sides. So we get y equals the square root of x minus 10. So last step, write it as an inverse function. And we have our inverse. So let's look at domain and range. Go back up to this original function. The domain of a quadratic, if you look at the picture or you look at your graph, the graph of a quadratic goes like this. So the domain, my x's go forever, so it's all real numbers. The range, though, has restrictions. It doesn't go forever down because this is opening up, and it starts at 10 because it says plus 10. So my range are going to be my y values greater than or equal to 10. Now, if you don't remember this, you can actually graph it on your calculator and see how far down your graph goes. So here's where the inverse comes into play. I want to find my domain and range of my inverse. If you recall, I said we just switch these. So my domain was all real numbers. In this case, my range is going to be all real numbers. In my domain is going to be my range, but my domain is still my x values, but it's going to be greater than or equal to 10. And let's see why when we look at our inverse function. Remember, you can't take the square root of a negative. So if I have a number less than 10, if I plug in 9, 9 minus 10 is going to give me negative 1, and I can't do that. Also, if you recall, the graph of a square root function goes like this. So we just have half of the values. We don't have the negative values. Okay? Let's try one. We got one more. F of x equals x cubed minus 9. So again, change it to y. Switch the x and y's. Step 2. Step 3, solve for y. This time it's a y cubed, so we're going to take the cube root of x plus 9 equals y. So f inverse of x is the cube root of x plus 9. So again, if you go up to the original, our domain is a cubic. And if you recall, a cubic looks like this. Oops, there you go. Cubic looks like that. So in a cubic, my domain and range are all real numbers. So in my inverse function, my domain and range will also be all real numbers. Okay. In the note packets, there's one that's a little bit harder. I'm not sure if we're going to go ahead and look at this one, I guess, together. And then if you want to practice one of these on your own, you can. It's the algebra that's a little bit harder here. So you also see that it says x cannot be 1 because we have a fraction here. There's restrictions on the domain. You can't divide by 0. So my domain would be all real numbers except x cannot be 1. And then you would need to find your range. Okay? To find your range, you would actually need to graph this function. Okay? So the big thing I want to concentrate on first right now is that x cannot be 1. So go ahead and we'll begin the process by plugging in y, switching our x and y. And then you look at this and it gets to be a little bit confusing here. I'm going to change this to a fraction as well, and that'll help us actually solve the problem. So now we have two fractions. So to solve this, or to solve for y, we're actually going to cross multiply. Okay? So to cross multiply, we're going to take 1 times this, so 2y plus 1 equals x times y minus 1. So the first thing you need to do is distribute that x, xy minus x. Okay, so we cross multiply. Now, again, we want to get y by itself. So there's a y on this side and a y on this side. So we need to take the xy to this side, and we need to take the 1 to this side. So we minus 1 to here, and then over here we minus xy. That's to get rid of the xy. Okay? So now, again, we want to get y by itself. So notice how they both have a y, so they have a GCF of y. So we need to take out the GCF of y, and we're left with 2 minus x. So remember, this is y times this. So to get rid of this, we're going to do the opposite of times, and we're going to divide by 2 minus x. So I have to divide this by 2 minus x. So you might see now that my final answer is f inverse of x equals negative x minus 1 over 2 minus x. I want to make sure you realize that I can multiply everything in here by a negative 1. So if you're doing Math Excel assignment and they give you this, these mean the same thing. Notice how all the signs are the opposite. Negative x, negative 1, positive 1, positive 2, negative 2, positive x, negative x, positive x. So either one of these would be the correct answer. Okay, so I want to make sure you understand and recognize how to find the correct answer in Math Excel as well. Okay, when you look at these, whoops, this should be a y. You might have noticed back up here I added in this domain and range. You would need to look on your calculator when you graph these, and you'll notice that y there's an asymptote at y. So the graph goes like this. So you can't have a y value of 2, and this would be at 1, or an x value of 1. So down here on my inverse, my domain can't have an x value of 2, and my range can't have a y value of 1 because they're the opposites. Okay. In the notes packet, there's one example of each of these to try. If you want to try them on your own and check your answers. If not, we're going to stop the video there. I gave you an example of each type.